The key showed up at midnight. I'd been talking with Fish, one of the regulars at the Angel Share bar. He was a fixture here, as alcohol-filled and shabby around the edges as the place itself. Fish liked to tell stories of all the fabulous adventures he'd had as a boy. Apparently, in one lifetime, he'd managed to be a pirate, a gigolo, a doorman, a graphic artist, a battlefield surgeon, and even a sponge diver. I went along with it, like everyone else. Fish told good stories, and even if he sometimes mixed them up, no one cared. I liked Fish. He never hit on me in the way some guys do when they see a female bartender. And he never said stupid shit like, "Hey Teryl, what's a pretty girl like you doing in a place like this?" In fact, he never asked me about my past, which I was grateful for. Fish took me exactly as I presented myself, and didn't worry about what darkness or pain might be lurking underneath. He always had more stories to tell about himself anyway. So it was odd that, when I turned my back to the bar and saw the key shining dully on the bar top, almost glowing under the dim yellow light of the unreliable overhead fixtures, and looked to Fish to see if it belonged to him, he shrugged. Fish is not known for being quiet when there's a story to be told. "Not yours?" I asked as I picked it up. It was a small brass key, perhaps something that might go to a post office box or a private locker. "Would it be sitting there waiting for you to toss it in the trash if it were?" Fish actually sounded a bit disgusted, and I couldn't imagine how a key could prompt such a reaction. None of my business, though. I threw the thing away. It landed on a heap of cocktail napkins, maraschino cherries, and beer bottles that filled the trash bin under the bar. Fish pushed his glass forward and I raised my eyebrow, unsure of what he wanted besides more alcohol. Most people stick to their favorite, but Fish got his nickname for a reason. He not only drank like a fish, he drank everything in his environment. And in a bar, that meant everything. Tonight he had a mojito, a Long Island iced tea, a shot of tequila, a PBR, and 2 whiskey sours. Don't ask me how he stayed upright. I assumed he had a liver of steel. "Jack," he said. "A double." I obligingly gave him the requested liquor and he sipped it as if it were ambrosia. I put away the Jack and noticed one of the guys in the corner booth waving at me. The two of them had been drinking Jamesons all evening, and, like Fish, they seemed determined to leave with exhausted livers. I walked over. "Can I get you gentlemen anything else?" The larger of the two stared at his empty glass, but the other, the one who had waved, shook his head. "We're ready to pay up." "All right." I figured out their tab and took it to their table. The smaller man looked at the total, sighed, and brought out a wallet. "Nothing gets cheaper over time, does it?" he said. The question seemed rhetorical. His companion didn't answer and wasn't looking at me, so I waited for him to hand me the money. He counted out the bills with quick, bird-like movements and laid $20 too much in front of me. "Keep it," he said before I could ask. He put the wallet away and ran a hand through his short black hair. His companion finally looked up. His eyes were bloodshot. It would seem at least one of them was feeling the effects of an evening spent throwing down whiskey. Strange that it was the guy with more bulk who was the most toasted. But some people have more tolerance than others. You could never tell who would pass out after a single drink, and who could suck down a bottle and walk away steady as a rock. The two of them got up and headed for the door. Now that I could see the other side of the larger gentleman's face, I noticed his ear was a ragged mess. It looked like an old injury. Maybe he'd been in the military or in a bad fight. Well, there was a story behind every customer at a bar like this. It was not the kind of place people without troubles chose to hang out. I pocketed the money and went back to the bar. Now that the two men were gone, it was me and Fish and an hour until closing time. Fish, I knew, wouldn't leave until the boss man shoved him out the door. I got my damp rag and went to the corner booth to wipe down the table and remove the trash the two men had left behind. The table didn't take more than a few moments of my time. The two men had been much neater than most clients. I went back to the bar and put the men's glasses in the sink. I glanced over at Fish to see if he'd finished his drink and if he'd request another, but he was merely staring sadly at the art hanging to the right of the bar, next to the boss's office door. Fish had told me once who the artist was, but I couldn't remember a name so long in Italian. The painting seemed to depict angels falling out of an attic onto people's heads, or something. When I said that out loud, though, Fish had laughed at me. That had been the one time I'd truly gotten angry with him. He didn't have to mock me for not knowing about old art. All the art in the bar was angel-related. I assumed that was to go with the bar's name, Angel's Share. That was what distillers called the whiskey that evaporated out of the barrels during the years it was aging. The liquid which had soaked into the wood of the barrel itself was the devil's cut. The remainder, whatever the angels and the devil didn't get, was what got bottled. Fish sighed and looked away from the painting. He was lanky, with fingers so long you figured his parents must have shelled out for piano lessons at some point. He was angular and pale, with short brown hair tinged with red which moosed straight up, as if it were shocked about something and were trying to escape his scalp. His clothes were sloppy and overlarge, and made him look even thinner than he was. His shoes were threads away from losing all structural integrity. Despite looking like a hobo, Fish always had money to drink away. Sometimes I wonder where he got the money, but I didn't ask. I didn't really want to know. Fish generally had an ageless quality, with unlined skin, a complete lack of gray in his hair, and a clear voice. I'd have said he was no more than 30, except his eyes were often sunken, and his demeanor was one of a man weighed down with far more years than Fish could possibly be burdened with. Still, no one who drank like he did could possibly be 40 without a crow's foot to be seen. I went to the back booth to deposit clean coasters decorated with the bar's name in great swooping letters. Now the booth was ready for more customers. I glanced up as my boss, Ware, poked his head out of his private office briefly. Fish raised a glass to him. Ware nodded in return and disappeared once more into the back room. As I turned away from the booth, a newspaper in the seat caught my eye. I picked it up. The paper had been folded to show an article on a recent murder. U-City man shot in South City. I'd heard of that briefly. Some customers had mentioned it the other day, but I hadn't paid much attention. Life was hard enough without making it worse by paying attention to the bad things that happened to other people. I brought the paper back to the bar. Fish glanced over at it, then held out his shot glass to me. With anybody else, I'd be telling them I was cutting them off. But Fish looked as sober as ever. Not for the first time. I wondered if he even could get drunk. "What you got there?" he asked as I took the glass and put it in the sink. "More trash, unless someone else wants to read it." Fish scanned the article that had been highlighted and bit his lip. "Sad. It's always sad when someone gets shot. And dies," he said. "It's always sad when someone dies." "Oh," I said, for lack of anything more coherent. I hadn't read past the headline, and I hadn't bothered to learn the details when the incident had been mentioned by customers. I walked around behind the bar and dropped my rag back in its place. "People don't realize how often the choices they make are reversible," Fish continued. "And then one day you're gone. No more chances." Maybe this guy could get drunk, and I was finally seeing the Fish that only appeared when the man was pickled. Seemed like he was going to be a morose drunk, which was better than angry or violent or disgusting. Morose I could deal with. I spotted a table with the remains of a martini I hadn't bussed yet. I reached for my rag. It wasn't there. I looked accusingly at Fish. He must have swiped it somehow without me seeing him do it. Normally, he wasn't the kind who played pranks, but he was so lit he probably had no idea what he was doing. I realized I'd be cutting him off. There's a first time for everything. Come on, I said. Where's my rag? Fish looked up from the paper which he was still studying. What rag? God, he was a talented liar. His manner appeared totally innocent. You know what I mean, I said. It's not funny. Fish shrugged. Not me. George. He drained the rest of his jack. I took the glass as soon as he placed it on the bar. He frowned. Hey, I was considering another one. No way. You're toasted. And you're the only other person here, so don't go blaming imaginary people for what you did. Fish shook his head and frowned. George may be imaginary, but he's not, really. Seriously, what? I asked in astonishment. He's imaginary, but he's not imaginary? For someone who ought to be in an ER suffering from alcohol poisoning, it wasn't so surprising that Fish was experiencing at least some effects from all the booze. The unnerving thing was that lying was the only symptom I could discern. His eyes were clear, his hands steady, his words unslurred. The man appeared totally sober. Pay up and leave, I said. You're finished for the evening. Fish hesitated, then shrugged and reached into his pocket. He pulled out a few bills and placed them on the bar. It's okay, I get it, he said. But George will prove me an honest man someday. Hope you get your rag back. Fish walked out the door as rock solid as a teetotaler. I swear I had no idea how he did that. My boss came out of the back as the door slammed behind Fish. He's leaving before closing time? I cut him off, I said. He's playing with me and he wants to blame it on George. Oh. Ware sat down in the creaky stool vacated by Fish. The scent of his aftershave wafted across the bar. Somehow, no matter how late it got, Ware managed to smell as if he'd been indulging in personal grooming. Heck, maybe he spent most of his time in the office preening. People had odd obsessions. George gets blamed for a lot. I shrugged. I guess. George was the excuse everyone at Angel's Share traditionally used when things went wrong. Did it rain one day and you left your car window rolled down? George did it. Miss your bus? George's fault. Misplace your wallet? George took it. Normally I thought this amusing, but not at the moment. What did George do now? Took my rag. Ware shrugged. We've got more. It's not important. Yes, we had more rags. That wasn't the point. It bothered me that Fish would take it and lie to me. Ware glanced at the paper Fish had left behind. He brought in a paper? I've never pegged him for a reader. It's not his. I found it in a booth. Fish read the article on someone being shot and seemed upset that they had died. Started going on about there being no more second chances after death. That's when I cut him off. Huh. Ware pushed the paper aside. No second chances after death. Guess that's true. Ware was a little shorter than Fish and far broader. He carried a lot of weight, but did it while remaining light on his feet. Built like a wrestler, moved like a dancer. Since I was a born stumblebum, his innate grace annoyed me. I had no idea of his age, and the relative lack of wrinkles mixed with the white hair gave conflicting estimates. The most intriguing thing about him was his eyebrows, which were white but tipped in black. I couldn't decide if that made him appear older or younger. But age wasn't important. What was important was that he was a good boss. He didn't mess with the staff and didn't allow anyone else to either. One night when a drunk college kid tried to feel me up while I was bussing a table, Ware burst out of his office, hefted the kid by his collar, and threw him into the street. He paid well, too. He said it was because you couldn't always find good help, so if you found someone you could rely on, you had to pay them decently. I didn't mind making more money than I'd ever done before, but it did seem odd that we needed to replace staff as often as we did. Most of them had worked in bars before, so they were used to the groping, the insults, the puke in the bathroom stalls, and all the other lovely things that went with imbibing excessive quantities of liquor. A boss who'd toss out someone who groped you, and who paid you well, wasn't one to lose lightly. Not that he was really a friendly guy, but I don't need to be friends with the boss. Let me do my job without hovering and don't abuse me, and we're good. Where was that in spades? The only thing that made me nervous was that I'd never been in his office. Not even when he interviewed me for the job. He'd interviewed me in a booth. And when he'd hired me, he made it clear that none of the staff was to go past the door marked private. I had never done so, and had no desire to do so. But it did make me wonder what he did back there, and who the people were who occasionally came in and went directly into that room without buying a drink, or even glancing around the interior of the bar. They seemed to know exactly where they were going, and what they were in the building for, and nothing could distract them from whatever duty they had there. The weirdest thing was that I'd never seen anyone come out of the office, except where. I assumed there was a back entrance, though that didn't explain why people came in the front only to leave by the back. "You available next Sunday?" Ware asked. "time-and-a-half pay." I normally didn't work Sundays, and on Mondays Ware closed the place up. I wasn't thrilled to work 6 days in a row, but the money would be useful. "Sure," I said. "Good. Boyle's got some event to go to. Family reunion or something." Ware shrugged and glanced around the empty bar. "Why don't you head on home for now?" Closing time wasn't for 45 minutes, and I still had a martini glass to get bussed. Ware saw the direction of my gaze. "Leave it," he said. "I got the gang coming in tonight anyway, so cleaning up beforehand is pointless." The gang was how Ware described his own drinking buddies. They would come in at closing time every other week or so, sit together in a cluster, and wait for everyone to leave. I hadn't gotten to know them well. They were an insular group. 3 men, 2 women, everyone seemingly middle-aged or a little older, and exceptionally well-spoken. The most exotic was a tall woman with midnight black skin, hair shaved so short she was nearly bald, and who wore bracelets that covered her arms up to her elbows. The others called her Little Girl. You think she'd be insulted, but she appeared to find it hilarious. I guess she was their version of Little John, except I suppose that made Ware Robin Hood, and that didn't really fit him. All right. I already knew he wouldn't dock me since he was the one sending me off. Like I said, he was a good boss. I put the money in the till and took out my tips. Ware didn't even bother to double-check my math, which always made me a little nervous. I had never been great at math, and while I was pretty sure I'd figured out everything correctly, I couldn't swear to it. Still, I certainly wouldn't cheat my boss on purpose. I glanced down and paled. My rag was there where I'd left it, limp and damp and in the proper place. Ware saw me blanch. "What's up?" "Rag's back." I grabbed my wallet, stuffed my tips inside, and walked around the bar. I knew that damn thing hadn't been there 2 minutes ago. "Don't worry about it," said Ware flatly. "It's only George." I didn't have an answer to that.